Welcome to the Bayside SF Giants talk show. I'm your host, Marc Delucchi. Today, joined by Kerry Crowley, and you got two folks who love the Giants, love baseball, and maybe dealing with some NFL draft hangover from both of our various lines of work. But in terms of what's been happening on the diamond, Kerry, how you been doing the past week?
Yeah, doing well. I mean, honestly, I've thought a lot more about Ricky Pearsall than I have about the San Francisco Giants. But I will say this: tune in
That's
on
right, the
Sunday.
Arizona State guy. I forgot
Yeah,
about that. That's
exactly.
right.
People forget Jaden Daniels to Ricky Pearsall once gave Arizona State folks hope. But that's enough football talk for
People
this.
forget, like people were paying attention to Arizona State. That was an insert there from you, Kerry. I think.
Exactly, exactly. But I will say I tuned in to Keaton Winn's start, and I think we may have touched on this on the last episode about how he just feels like he has the higher 2024 ceiling than Kyle
Mhm.
Harrison because he's further developed. He's got three pitches that he's trusting right now, whereas Harrison is more of a one pitch guy, getting a feel for that second pitch. And you've just seen him consistently turn in great starts, consistently keep the ball on the ground. And it feels like if he can stay healthy, which is a huge if for Keaton Winn, the Giants pitching staff will be in really good shape, at least for the first 2 to 3 months of the season. They've still got the black hole that is the Blake Snell day right
Mhm.
now that they have to figure out at some point. But the way that Keaton Winn's throwing the ball, Mark, really should inspire a lot of confidence. And it's not just because it's the fastball split. It's also he's trusting that slider. And it may never be a plus pitch, but it does help keep hitters off balance.
Yeah, since quick update again, since we talked last week for those listeners who may be a bit tuned out, Blake Snell obviously went on the injured list shortly after, so he's going to be out for at least a few weeks here and potentially longer. We'll see how. I believe it's a adductor strain, right? Was
Adductor strain,
yeah,
yeah.
everyone's favorite muscle that popped up 2 years ago on IL announcements. And yeah, like you mentioned, Giants took 2 out of 3 against the Pirates in large part because Keaton Winn had a really good start to round out that series. And prior to that, they also took 2 out of 3 from the Mets. So a decent week of Giants baseball, albeit not necessarily anything earth shattering, but lots of steps in the right direction. I think the offense, again, continues to be a lot of middling and leaving a lot of room for improvement and a lot of frustration from the fans. The bullpen and its league worst ERA and other things had its moments of struggles, but they also secured plenty of wins. And again, I still think most of these issues are coming from the offensive lack of scoring runs. But as you mentioned, you got good starts from Keaton Winn. You got Jordan Hicks striking out 9, and in the lone loss against the Pirates. Actually,
Yeah.
Jordan Hicks had one of his better starts in a few. And again, we've been loud and plenty Jordan Hicks stuff. Patrick Bailey, it seemed like a little premonition from us on the pod. We were talking about his star turn, and he went walk off over the weekend as well. So again, I'd say things on the upswing overall. And like you mentioned, I think Keaton Winn continuing since he got called up. It's the pitch efficiency is incredible. In 6 innings, he only needed 80 pitches to do it. His he isn't, and I wonder if he ever will be able to get the strikeouts that you would expect from his stuff. With the
Yeah.
fastball that sits in the upper mid to upper 90s, with the splitter that's as good as it is, and the slider that he's beginning to regain that confidence with. You would think that there'd be more kind of strikeouts and punch outs coming, and it hasn't really in the upper minors in the big leagues. Maybe that's something that comes after 2 or 3 years in the big leagues, but again, we've talked about the Giants player development. We've been critical of the Giants player development. Keaton Winn is one, I think, that the player development deserves a lot of credit because the thing they've emphasized with the limited pitch counts that have driven many of us to frustration over recent years is the part of the point of that is telling pitchers when they're coming up, hey, if you want to work in deep into games, you can do it on 60 pitches. You just have to pitch differently, right? You have to learn to build to that. And to their credit, Keaton Winn feels like the big beneficiary and someone you can really tip your hat to is say, hey, look at our process. This was a guy who, when he was drafted out of community college, most folks said probably a closer down the line because of the big stuff and a lack of feel and command. In the middle of his development, he gets hit with the Tommy John surgery. Like, that is not a profile you expect to then be able to turn around and end up looking like a mid-rotation arm this quickly. And again, the Giants player development, they as much as they've emphasized swing and miss and emphasized playing for the strikeout in a lot of ways, it seems like with Winn, they said, no, like let's let you work on learn to throw your splitter for strikes and just use it to get weak contact because we don't need the strikeout if we get the ground ball to Matt Chapman, right?
Yeah, and I think that the prototype is evident at the front end of the Giants rotation in Logan Webb because he's kind of the poster child for this player development, someone who was also hit with Tommy John surgery after he was drafted, someone who, had to figure out a way at the major league level to evolve and develop, which is what Keaton Winn is in the process of doing right now. When Keaton Winn first made his debut, it was just true four-seam fastball and splitter for him, and he's becoming more of a three-pitch guy, could one day end up as a four-pitch guy, but I think with Logan Webb, it was, hey, let's use your weapons, but let's throw strikes and see where that takes you because your stuff can be so good that it will induce soft contact. It won't be the type of stuff that, hey, on a certain day, you could get 10 or 11 strikeouts. But to do that, you may only throw 4 2/3 or 5 1/3 innings. And if the goal is to save the bullpen, if the goal is to qualify for a win, and the goal is to put your team in the best possible position to win at the end of the game, then hey, put the ball in the corners of the strike zone and let your defense go to work. And in the past, the Giants haven't had the defense to go to work, Marc. It's been a struggle for them. This year, they do. I mean, look, I'm fed up with the offense right now. I've seen enough flailing and enough pitches down the middle that they've taken that it's been frustrating to watch. But this team does have the defense to complement its pitchers. It does have a group that you say, hey, Logan, roll some ground balls. Keaton, roll some ground balls. Nick Ahmed and Matt Chapman are going to take care of it. Tyro Estrada, I think he's 5 outs above average right now as we end the month of April. Lamont Wade Jr. has been a plus player over at first base for this team in my eyes. So I just think that the pitch efficiency is across the board a great strategy for a staff that already has great stuff, but doesn't need to maximize its stuff because the defense is really good.
Yeah, and by the way, to talk about something we talked about, I think on the very first episode of this pod, Jung Hoo Lee is starting to grade out as an above
Yeah.
average, defensive center fielder, right? Like, which again was one of the early questions, was one of the things about how would he play, and he's proving to be that anchor. We do have to talk a little about the offense because again, the Giants are below 500. We can't be as positive as maybe we'd want to be. But I guess I want to talk about one player because I don't think we've really touched on the pod, partially because I'm a partial to him and a consistent defender of him. But Mike Yastrzemski had a pretty ugly start to the season. Obviously, this past week, he heated up quite a bit. I think he hit 350 or 400, somewhere in that range, hit a couple of homers. His numbers on the season are better now, although still below average. Feels like Giants fans have been calling for Mike Yastrzemski to be replaced, or I've seen people on Giants Twitter and whatnot calling for Yastrzemski to be replaced almost since as soon as he arrived. But yeah, what is your take on this outfield? I mean, you could say the whole team needs more offense, but I think particularly because of the infield defense and the pay rate, the payrolls where people are at, those aren't the spots that are moving, right? So you look to the outfield corners is where that flexibility might end up coming from, and Yastrzemski's obviously in that spot. Austin Slater, kind of the secondary role of that, who also is obviously off to a very slow start. Uh, you know, where are you at with that right now with this Giants team?
Yeah, I mean, I think the last 10 days, Mike Yastrzemski has separated himself from Austin Slater in this platoon to where you trust Yastrzemski right now to go out and give you a good at bat against right-handed pitchers. Since the beginning of the season, the at-bats weren't necessarily competitive. There was a lot of swing and miss. There was a lot of pitches floating right down the middle that Yastrzemski wasn't swinging at, and a lot of pitches, back foot sliders, pitches below the strike zone, and then he'd get beat above with the heater where it was just predictable the way that his at-bats were going down. That has not been the case over the last week, and I just think that there's a higher ceiling with Yastrzemski compared to Slater because we've seen it before. We've seen what it looks like when he is in the, absolutely in the zone, and it was the entire 2020 season, which is only 60 games, but you remember he finished 8th in MVP voting that year, and it was well earned. I mean, he was hot for a good 2 months of that season. He hit 20 the year before. And look, I don't think he is going to be a 110, 115 OPS plus guy moving forward over the course of 162 games, but I do think that you can get 100 to 105 out of him in the OPS plus category. I do think he can be league average. And for a Giants team that plays 81 games at Oracle Park, Mike Yastrzemski's a heck of a right fielder. He's Gold Glove caliber out there. And I think that makes a difference. And you're going to have to live with some strikeouts. You're going to have to ultimately potentially find him a different platoon partner if Slater doesn't get it going. But He also hasn't had the same share of at bats because the Giants haven't faced the same number of left-handed pitchers. And so I've said, middle of May is when I think we'll get a really good feel on this platoon. I think that you would have liked to have had it by the end of April, but you're starting to see it with Yastrzemski at the end of April. Slater will get more opportunities against lefties on this road trip. And now middle of May is kind of the point where they may have to make a decision and, figure something out and get Elliot Ramos into some of these opportunities against left-handed pitching because man, no one in the organization might be hotter right now at the plate.
Yeah, Kerry, what a segue. I have this baseball reference page right in front of me, and it's indeed for Elliot Ramos's. And it's specific, the splits, because he's only had 33 plate appearances against lefties here down in AAA. But you want to know what he's hitting against lefties?
Oh, probably 400 with a 1200 OPS.
Yeah, he's hitting 482 with a 1360 OPS. His
Yeah.
slugging's 815. He's got nearly as many walks as strikeouts. 4 walks, 5 strikeouts. That's the one thing with Ramos. You look at the strikeout rate, pretty consistently over the last few years. When the strikeout rate's gotten high, it's almost all or the majority of it's coming from when he's facing that same sided pitching against lefties. He doesn't strike out. Obviously, he has the 3 home runs against lefties as well in those 33 plate appearances. So, yeah, no, Elliot Ramos is for sure on Austin Slater's back. Luis Matos has gotten off to a slow start at AAA, but again, he's still there and he has the pedigree that, he doesn't like. No matter how Matos performs, him getting a call up won't surprise me just because of the pedigree of who he is as a prospect in a similar way. Honestly, in a similar way to how the front office handled Bailey last year, even though these are different regime prospects, like different kind of fits, right? Like ultimately, the Giants can move on from Slater at any point. And again, I think I'm still not convinced that if they got a couple good weeks out of Slater, that they wouldn't be trying to move him to another team as they sort of watch that luxury tax line too, potentially. Like,
Yeah, that's an interesting part of the
as they
equation.
sort of finagle this line here, depending on what they're looking at financially. But yeah, no, I think Yastrzemski is a really solid player. I wanted to do some research to see how many players, because I think it's now his 5th season, or he has 5 seasons in the tank with the Giants. All of them, he's had a weighted runs created of 100 or better. And I want to see how many Giants this century have done that, because I feel like it might be Bonds and maybe a couple other players. It's going to be a short list, right? Like,
It's a really, really short list.
like Yastrzemski is kind of the new Belt to me in the sense of that this is a solid player. And to be fair, Belt was a better first baseman than Yastrzemski is as a right fielder, but it's similar to me in the
Really?
sense of, I think so. I think so.
Okay. Yeah.
I think Yastrzemski as a hitter is a average above average hitter in the way I think Belt at peak Belt Wars was an above average sort of borderline elite hitter that was really surprising.
I'll give you that. I thought you were talking purely about in the field.
No. I'm saying
Okay.
sort of like overall positional value, like what they mean to the team.
Okay,
But it feels
we're 100% in agreement here now, Mark. I was like,
we
usually
were about
we're
to
right in
we were about
line.
to but I think we it feels like a similar place. Yastrzemski's solid. Like he's very good at what he does, and it's a very solid role. And like Belt, he looks terrible when he's bad. He looks absolutely terrible when he's bad. And then they'll have these streaks where like this looks like an elite right fielder, and he's not. And we know now at this point he's not an elite right fielder, and that's okay. It doesn't mean the Giants should get rid of him. It doesn't mean the Giants should be racing to replace him, but it just means you're going to get these ebbs and flows. And again, when you have the problem is, right, when you have an offense without the consistent stars, when you have the offense without the Juan Soto, you weren't able to get the Aaron Judge, right? Like that's where you see these more, right? Like these things become more of an issue, as you've said many a times, right? When you need to string 3 singles together in an inning to score, having any of those players that are streaking that way is really problematic. But again, Yastrzemski isn't the problem. Like that's part of the frustration, I think, from Giants fans is fans are always looking for the immediate solution. And unfortunately, when it comes to this offense, I do really think the only solution there is the guys who are currently playing play better. And that's
Yeah.
not the best place to be, but it is what it is. Like that really is, I think, the position the roster was built to kind of be in.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because you've got a right field platoon that feels like a couple of 7-8 hitters.
Yeah.
And I don't know that most rosters are built for your right fielder to be a 7 hitter in the lineup. And granted, Bob Melvin continues to run Austin Slater out there as a leadoff hitter against left-handed pitchers, which I think is a source of frustration for people. And if he was hitting lower in the lineup, maybe it would feel a bit different at this point. But the average is still under 150. The OPS still well under 400 right now. And I think that, he never had the opportunity to get going against 3 lefties in a row like the Giants have had at the outset of other seasons in past Slater years. But the longer this goes on, the more the focus hones in on what are the Giants getting out of a premium offensive position. And for Mike Yastrzemski, you could say maybe average to slightly above average offense and great defense over the course of 162. But for Slater right now, it's neither. And that's a big issue.
And because Slater has become, his defensive value has diminished so much over recent years. I think probably because of the accumulation of injuries. I think Slater's also someone, again, when we talk about the shift from Melvin to from Kapler to Melvin, excuse me, like, it's really hard to be a platoon player. It's really hard to be a role player in Major League Baseball. And again, I think there were problems with strategically with how Kapler approached things. Like I think there are many players who are benefiting from Melvin's presence because they're going to play every day. They're not worried about getting pulled in the seventh inning. Like, there is a benefit to that. But the player who loses in this equation, and I think their job did get markedly harder, is the Austin Slater, because under Gabe Kapler, when Slater was healthy, Slater's pretty much going to play every day. It might have only been for 2 innings, right? It might have been 1 plate appearance. It might have been 1 double switch bait. But Austin Slater was almost guaranteed to play 5 out of 6 days. Where with Melvin, he is not that he isn't willing to pinch hit. He doesn't play. He plays platoons plenty, but he does not do it to the way Kapler did. And so Slater has kind of become, this is, when we think about Giants teams, this is, Mark Sweeney in 2005 almost, right? Like, this is like
that's a pull. Mark Sweeney into that. Earlier today, I was thinking about Brian Dallimore when I was out for a run, but Mark Sweeney in 2005 is a pull, Mark.
I think it's because I think Sweeney is the last Giants-Dodger player trade. If I'm not mistaken, there might have been one since in the Zaidi. It was definitely through the Sabian Evans years, because it was for a player to be named later. It turned out to be Travis Denker, who's one of my dad's prospects.
Travis Denker, great pull again. Wow.
That one. But anyway, but yeah, he's in a much harder spot to be in, and so again, I think that's another part of it where we'll see how these things sort it out. And again, I think a lot of pressure is going to a lot of other places, because ultimately, right, like Jorge Soler is not hitting like the Giants paid and need Jorge Soler to produce at, right? Like, we can talk about his runners and scoring position stuff. We've talked about that on other podcasts with the team. You can apply it to Soler specifically, but this is the thing with Soler. As much as there is disappointment, and to be fair, almost most of that is tied to when he's had his hits. It's not really, his overall production isn't great, but it's actually not that far from his.
I know. That's
career
the
numbers.
hardest thing.
Like,
I'm
that's the
looking
thing
at
with
his
Soler
line right now. It's the hardest thing.
When they signed Soler, I told Giants fans, I said, this guy and Jock Peterson, Peterson's arguably been a better, more productive, consistent player. And again, I'm not saying there aren't, like, that doesn't mean I'd rather have Jock Peterson than Jorge Soler. By the way, Peterson's OPS is like 950 in Arizona right now.
Of course it is.
But
you knew that would be the case.
But no, it's just like Jorge Soler is a guy who's been an elite hitter for 2 seasons and otherwise has been roughly league average, kind of fluctuating with his home run stretches. And we'll see if that lands.
I want to add that a week ago, the decision for Jorge Soler to just essentially take the Mitch Haniger contract and add on a year was looking way worse. Mitch Haniger has cooled off in the last several days. The OPS is down to 713, which is only 9% above league average. But Mitch Haniger got off to a really hot start with the Seattle Mariners. Jorge Soler obviously did not get off to that hot start with the San Francisco Giants. And you're thinking, every Giants fan would have told you Jorge Soler every day of the week over Mitch Haniger. That's an easy call. And then you get 3 weeks into the season, you're thinking, maybe it's not so easy because Mitch Haniger is actually performing. But I do think the numbers are going to, even out over the course of the season. Soler will be the better player. It's essentially the same contract. I think Soler may have gotten $1 million less than Mitch Haniger.
Yeah, I think so.
It's only a year longer that you're.
And he doesn't have the player option like Haniger did, right?
No, I don't. I don't believe
so. That's also more beneficial to the team, right? Because with Haniger, if he does have a great year this year, he'll just opt out in Seattle, and they won't have him. So
yeah, exactly. But it's trending in the right direction for the Giants right there. So
yeah. So on that note,
it has to be 5 minutes on Mitch Haniger.
We'll save it for next week. On that note, we'll wrap this one up short. Again, apologies, NFL draft stuff. We are a bit more crammed than usual. This week, the Giants are going to Boston. Another Fenway Park game for Mike Yastrzemski. We'll be facing the Red Sox. Then they'll have a 3-game set. There you go, Kerry. Shout out your great work. And they will be going for a 4-game set in Philadelphia against the Phillies. We'll be back. We'll give you a much more beefier episode next week. I promise you on that front. And where we'll first update will be whether Joey Bart can keep his OPS above 1,000 in Pittsburgh. This has been Bayside SF Jazz Talk Show. Y'all have make sure to like, subscribe, do all that stuff. You probably know the drill by now. But anyway, have a good one. Talk to you next week.